Welcome back to another episode of the Brandon Smith podcast. This week I had Rob Hammerschmidt on, who is a huge rugby fan from the United States and is involved in the growth of the game with Major League Rugby over there. He has his own show on Hammer Rugby, his channel, so do go check that out. And he's part of the group MLR Rants. They put a weekly podcast looking at the MLR on. Fantastic podcast, very, very interactive. Link in the description to that as well. I hope you enjoy this podcast. Feel free to subscribe if you do. Enjoy the pod.
Okay, I just wanted to start by wondering how an American who's grown up with basketball, baseball, American football, and all those traditional American sports gets into rugby in the first place, because it's not that popular sport in the US, is it?
No, it's interesting is we had a conversation on the MLR rant a few weeks ago about the numbers, and it surprised me because our host Ty did a little bit of research, and we have about 120,000 registered players in the United States, and that goes from what we call rookie rugby, which is a touch form of rugby, all the way up to senior level rugby, and we rank fifth, I think, right behind England in terms of registered players. So we have a number of registered players, but obviously it doesn't really tell the story about just how much potential there is in the United States with such a large population and about 350 million Americans. That being said, my personal story, I kind of came into rugby in a little bit different way. Most Americans come into rugby at some point in time during college. Many pretty good athletes decide to go to a big university where they're not big enough or not serious enough or just not quite athletic enough to play Division I or Division II American football or basketball or some other major sport, and so they want to go to a big school and can't make those programs, or they go to a small school and find their way to rugby through one of the other sports. My story is a little bit different. I'm a teacher by trade and profession, and I started teaching, and I was playing flag football, which is not uncommon around here. There is no senior American football leagues. There are flag football leagues is about it. And I was having a meeting with one of my students' parents, a woman who has a mouth like a truck driver and could probably do pretty well down by the wharf and defend herself pretty well. She's quite a gal. Anyway, Roanne and I were talking, and she said to me, you look pretty athletic. Do you do plenty sports? I said, yeah, well, I play American football, flag football. And she said, that sport's for woofers, maybe, you might call them. I don't know. But she said that, and then she said, you ought to come out and play rugby. So I came out, watched a practice, and pretty soon I was pretty pretty locked in from there on out.
Yeah, and it's interesting that because obviously in the UK, in the school curriculum, rugby is part of the curriculum. I grew up in a school where it was football or soccer for you guys. It was rugby, and then in the summer be athletics or cricket. Well, obviously it's very different in the USA, and I think that's something that if rugby is to grow in the US even more, as you guys were talking on your show, that putting it in the curriculum could be really, really key to that. So you played rugby growing up. Did you get into coaching at all?
Yeah, I actually did. I took a bit of a hiatus from the game. I was still tied to my men's club, which actually, if you look behind me, that's actually a painting that one of my good mates, he was one of the prop that I locked behind. He actually had it done, and then he printed about 100 prints. So anyway, I would go to the club occasionally, be involved socially. I wasn't that involved in the club, largely because I had my own children. And I got back into rugby seriously because my older of my two sons began playing when he was in fifth grade. So what I found out, interestingly, is a lot of the mates that I'd played with and played senior level rugby with, we'd actually we had won the Midwest, Division II Midwest in the United States, and been in the top 4 in the United States. There were several of us that had kids all about the same time, and we all started to get involved in youth rugby. So there were a number of us that were actually running youth rugby programs all around the Chicago metropolitan area. And basically, I got into it because my son got involved, and the club he was playing with, great club, great people, great organization. One of the bigger ones in Chicago, by the way. It was just a little too far for us to travel, about 35 to 45 minutes, which is pretty far. Through and another father started a club right in our area, in the western suburbs.
Awesome. So you got involved in coaching to that. It's quite cool, that, because usually it's the father who takes the son to play, and then the son will fall in love with the game, then he'll pass it on to his son. But it's your son who sort of brought you back to rugby, which is quite cool and a little bit different. And I think for us in the UK, the thing that we forget is how big America is compared to the UK. You know, there's a local rugby team in every single town in the UK. That there is a rugby team, you know, and I live in North Wales, and so I'm, you know, literally I can think of probably about 10 clubs within a half an hour drive from me that if I wanted to play, I could pick out any of them 10 clubs. And for the USA, it's very, very different, where who knows, you may be, as you said, 40 minutes away from a club, but for other people, I'm sure it's a lot longer. It's a lot more of a distance. It's not as if there's an American football team here. I wanted to get into the Major League Rugby side of things because I've been a massive fan of the league. I think it's a fantastic league. I think lots of doubters were there at the start and it's not going to work, it's not going to be successful. But I do think that we have seen the nucleus of a new league which can really, really work. I genuinely believe that. And I think the growth has been really exciting. Can you take us right back to the start, though, of Major League Rugby? What were the opening discussions about that, and how did that finally come about?
Well, there's no doubt that the initial goings, not necessarily of Major League Rugby, but certainly of pro rugby in America, were very rough. And it started with the Pro 14, and it was the first foray into pro level rugby in the United States. And it actually started as an entity very closely tied to the USAR. So in a way, pro rugby and USAR, the United States Rugby Association, were tied, you know, 1-to-1. And the guy who started it was the sole proprietor of the entire league. So there wasn't a lot of buy-in, and I think that was one of the reasons why it struggled so much. And financially, it struggled because in the end, there were players that were owed contracts, coaches that were owed contracts, and that couldn't be followed through with. And that's one of the reasons why the United States Rugby Association is really struggling financially, is some of the lingering effects from pro rugby. The MLR got started with a little different model, very much more of a model like Major League Soccer, which is the professional soccer league here in the United States. And the idea is that you have individual franchised, which are owned and operated, but individual owners have a stake in the league. Players are actually contracted to the league itself, and then they enter into negotiations with teams. But essentially, the league itself owns the players, or has the contract with the players. It's one of the ways that they control player, the limits on the contracts, the salary caps and salary limits on the contracts. And it's kind of interesting. I'm sure it'll come up later, but with Colorado backing out of the league, that's one of the big items that we'll probably talk about in upcoming episodes of The Rant, is what's going to be happening with those players. Technically, they're contracted to Colorado through into June. Once that happens, I'm sure there's going to be a draft for those players, and they'll be distributed out to the other remaining franchises. So it got its start. I think it was. I really started to get heavily involved in it in its second season. So 2 years ago is when I really started to get involved. It's not turning a profit, but certainly they demonstrated that they can operate successfully. I think one of the big things is to get more, they need to get a broadcaster, a consistent broadcaster. I think they took a step this year as they actually had broadcasting rights that were purchased by CBS Sports Network here in the States, ESPN Plus, and then Fox Sports was the other one. And they each were going to carry 17 games, and then CBS was actually going to show the final on CBS Sports, which they had done last season. And actually, that final was very well received in terms of its ratings, the share. I don't remember what the share was, but I think owners were very, very pleasantly surprised by the Nielsen ratings that were coming out of that season, second season. So that was positive.
Yeah, Major League Rugby is certainly growing, and you know, you're a big NOLA fan. I know that you really care about your team. You even got the shirt on, and you know what I've really been impressed by is the amount of people who go there. Because although people say, "Oh, there's only 2,000, 3,000 at games," I'm an Ospreys fan here in the UK, and I've been to see them at the Liberty before, the stadium they play in, and that stadium can hold up to 20,000 people pretty comfortably. It's actually made for top-level soccer, and Ospreys will be lucky to get 3,000 fans there, and that's them trying to like, you got international Wales players in there, you got Fijians, you got Tongans, you got top-level rugby, and in a country where rugby is top, and they're only getting 3,000. That's maybe a bigger issue for Welsh rugby and the challenges there, but for Major League Rugby to already be attracting those numbers in. And what I've been really impressed with by listening to other people who are involved in Major League Rugby is about how there's such a family atmosphere around the games, something that is really, really important to get families to come along, so you get that longevity, you get those generations coming through. The first two seasons we've seen Seattle win the two titles, but I watched quite a few of the games, watched a lot of the highlights. Didn't feel as if it was Seattle go and smash everyone and win the league, which is really important for the league, that it's a competitive league, that people feel, okay, my team has a chance to do something here. So I want to ask you about NOLA Gold. I want to ask you, how did you get involved in that team, and how are your team doing this season?
That's interesting. You hit upon some really important points, and let me address some of those points and work them into your question about NOLA. It's kind of interesting. I got involved in NOLA Gold because in the second season, they engaged in a contract with a young man named Nick Feeks. Nick Feeks essentially played fly half, a little bit of scrum half for Lindenwood. My son, who is now he's completing his sophomore year at the university, he was interested in playing rugby at the next level, and Lindenwood being a top 3 or 4 team this season, certainly, but when he was looking at them, a top 5 team in the nation, they'd won 2 national sevens championships at that point. He began looking at the school. He made a trip. I took him down there, and he actually did a bit of practicing with the lads one afternoon, did some skill work with them, and a young man named Nick Feeks had worked with Preston, my son, and I really appreciated the time that he took. He was a Rudy Schultz finalist, so that's the top in collegiate rugby in America. That's the award for the top rugby men's rugby player. He was one of the 5 finalists, and I just really felt like, here's a guy who he didn't know any young kid anything, but he took the time to help my son out and give him and work with him a bit at that session. So I became a fan of a Nick right away, and when he was recruited by NOLA, I began to follow NOLA, and just through Go Gold and Rugby Watch NOLA, 2 fan pages down there in New Orleans, ran by some friends of mine who I've just become friends with on Facebook. Adrian Thompson runs Go Gold, and Benjamin Haswell runs Rugby Watch NOLA. I've just become very connected to the rugby community in New Orleans. It's kind of funny. I was supposed to, before all the virus hit, I had made plans during my spring break from teaching to take my family down there. We're going to make a trip of it. We're going to watch NOLA play Toronto. And unfortunately, when the COVID problems broke out, we had to cancel our trip. But I was going to make the 900-mile drive from Chicago to New Orleans. Yeah. So and I was maybe going to try to sneak a trip up to Toronto when they played up to Toronto. That's been about, I don't know, maybe 8 hours, but yeah, unfortunately it didn't come to fruition. But next year I'm looking forward to it. And they were, some of the guys down there. A buddy of mine, Doug, was saying they even had prepped Rob Hammerschmidt Day for that game. So they've always made me feel welcome. You know, and I have good relationships with a couple of folks in the admin. So it's been a really great relationship and connectivity with a team that's so far away.
I think that's really awesome, because you guys must feel like you're in this together. You are at the start of this new league, and it's really exciting. And as you said with Nick Feats, I've seen you've done interviews with him in the past. You did one last week, I believe, on your show, on the MLR Rant, and his willingness just to come on, be open, be honest. And I think because the league is in its infancy, I think it's so incredible to see how fans can get so close to the players. In the UK, especially in the soccer scene, you will not see that. You know, I guess obviously because the league is so big, but when it's in its infancy, it's really nice that you're able to get that connection, and that's what's going to make things successful.
Yeah, and the league has done that in a lot of different ways. From things like Nick coming on my show. I think in June we're going to have Chance Wagalewski from Rugby ATL, who is also an LU graduate and a USA Eagle. He's a prop. So Luke White from Colorado has talked about coming on, but there's going to be a delay because he's still under contract with Colorado. Coach Osborne from NOLA is going to be on in 2 weeks, I believe. So we have a lot of guests in the league, players in the league. That are going to be coming on, and I think that's a feather in the cap. The other thing that they're doing is for example, in NOLA, after the game, the VIP tickets, you get to join in on the post-game social. They still do a man in the match. They still keep a lot of those things that are the essence of rugby down there in NOLA, and so you can be a part of that with the VIP tickets. You can still meet the players, get things signed. They're very welcoming in that regard. One of the cool things, the new team this year, Old Glory DC, they play at a small university called Catholic University just outside the DC suburbs. And any of the feeds that you see from games there, so they have their seating, which fills about 3,000, and they get pretty close to the full stadium, and at least the grandstands filled. But on the other side, it's really cool because it's standing room only. They have tents pitched. You see about 3, 4, 5 people deep, and literally you're 15 feet away from the pitch. And the great thing, what I think made that atmosphere unique, is the fact that there are people there, rugby fans, who are 15 meters away from Tundai Metaruya, a World Cup rugby winner, just this last, from November. They're that close. And so the fact that there's that connectivity with fans, the fact that there's players like in NOLA, but at other teams, there are players that actually are coaching youth programs. So there's youth players that are being coached by professional rugby players. It's one of the ways that the guys, support their contract, because some guys are making $6,000, some guys are making $15,000 US, some guys are making $45,000 when you're talking about a player of the caliber of the beast. So they supplement by doing things like that in coaching. That gives a real connectivity, and I think that's key to the growth of the league. People got to feel like, hey, I know that guy. I met that guy. That guy signed, my ball. That guy walked my child out onto the pitch. That guy took the time to talk to us after the game at the social. Those things are critical to growth. I hope they never lose that connectivity with the fan base.
And I think that's maybe the risk with, if the league grows that much more. Take MLS, for instance. When it started very, very small, and now, it's a credible league. It is a league that people will watch. You look at Atlanta United, they draw 40,000 to a game, things like that. And although that's taken 20 years, I think MLR does have the potential to do that. And what you, as you say, want to avoid is players and maybe coaching staff losing that connection to the fans, or the fans losing the connection to the team. But I think the way that it started gives it a much bigger chance of staying like that and of keeping that connection. And that then will filter into the community. More people get involved in rugby. Rugby grows in the USA. And that's what everyone wants. You mentioned about the Beast. I want to talk about foreign signings and their impact on the league, because we've had some massive signings. probably the biggest man, Nonu, would you say?
Absolutely. He, the beast. Rene Ranger was a pretty good signing for Colorado. He really, once his visa issues were sorted out, I think he really elevated the play in Colorado, led them to a victory over Toronto, which Toronto at that point was undefeated. And I think I would have loved to have seen the season play out and see him develop young American Victor Cruz, because that experience that Ranger brought, I think, really elevated the play of Cruz. So. Some incredible signings. Nonu was the difference maker to what was already a strong team. There's no doubt that San Diego, I think, was nodded to win the league if the season had played out. They had the depth and they had the skills at critical positions. But those were key. And there's been talk right now. I don't know what you guys have seen over there in the UK. There's been talk that rumors that Dan Carter might be coming to our shores potentially to Rugby United New York.
Yeah.
And Bastro, of course, was a big signing for them last year. Foden, the previous 2 years, was a big signing from the UK. I think Ben has been a tremendous addition to the league, and he's committed to rugby in the United States. For me, for foreign signings, and by the way, I don't know what your fans and followers know, but Colorado kind of got out of the league not for financial reasons. That wasn't the reason. I think they were one of the more stable franchises in the league. I think one of their challenges was they've really seen the league go towards more heavily reliant upon foreign players. The original, I think, the starting roster was supposed to initially, when the league started, have 3 foreign players. Then before the season, number 1 got started, it was moved up to 5, and then it was 10, and now it was up to 12. And I really think that they saw the league, when it initially started, they got involved, being it much different. Their model was they wanted to build American rugby. So if you look at their roster, they had a bit more of a United States based roster. Even Luke White, who's a Kiwi, is actually I thought I heard that he would actually be available soon to be in the Eagle pool potentially because of residency. So even somebody like that is kind of they're a foreigner, but when I see them take a step towards becoming a more permanent resident in the United States and even looking towards potential, to be in an Eagle pool, for me that's a bit of a transition, because there's a commitment to rugby developed in the United States. So that's why the Colorado pulled out. I think that's vital. You got to have players that know the game, that have a high level of rugby IQ, that can begin to transfer that and help develop that amongst the individual teams. And so guys like Ranger, guys like Nono, guys like the Beast, guys like Foden, guys, you go down the list, they're critical to that for sure.
Yeah, and they've done very well, but I think, as you said, it's important to get that balance between, again, these foreign guys over, which is fantastic because, one, it's a big name. People be like, oh, an All Black, a World Cup winner, one of the best centres in his day, is playing down the road from me. Most people wouldn't just go to watch the team, they go to watch Nonu, which hopefully in the end leads to them watching the team. And hopefully then helps them notice that, there's some really good Americans playing the sport here. And this is something I can get involved in. But Colorado, of what I'm understanding from you, felt that it was getting too much that way. And it's so important to get the balance right because, the problem, again, over here in the UK is, we've had these players come over from New Zealand, from South Africa. So for Wales, we've got a guy called Hadley Parks who plays centre. I think he's a decent player, but there's a young Welshman called Owen Watkin who is 22, plays for the Ospreys, had about 10 caps for Wales, and I think he's a really special talent. I think he's really, really exciting. And Hadley Parks has come over to Wales. Yes, he's committed to Wales, but he's played for Wales for 2 years, and now he's been offered a massive contract out in Japan, and he's jumping ship and he's off to Japan. And I feel almost as if that stalled Owen Watkins' development so much now. And Owen Watkins isn't the same player that he used to be. And so there are other players stepping into his position now. And I think that's really important for MLR that doesn't happen, that these foreign players don't come in, and then the American players then, it stalls their progression because the league is at the perfect place to develop young US talent. It's not, no disrespect to the league, it's not a massive league yet. What it needs, it's got this platform to develop young American players. And although these foreign signings are brilliant, and as I said, it draws fans, like seeing Basto, seeing Nonu, and having the signing of Carter would be massive for the league. And, that room is pretty solid of what I understand to be happening. And, he would suit New York, and New York would suit him as well. So, but yeah, it's about getting the balance right for New York. I want to move on to the draft, because this is really, really interesting, because in the UK, we don't have a draft in any of our sports. So for the UK viewers, can you explain how this draft would work and would it benefit the league?
The draft is kind of interesting. It's gotten a lot of a variety of responses. There are those followers of the league who have scoffed at the draft, who, quite frankly, they think we should be focusing more on an academy system that is consistent with, Wales, with the UK, the bigger UK, and South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia. There are others that think the draft is perfectly appropriate because this is America and we've got to work within an American sporting culture. I don't know what your familiarity with your followers and your fans are with the draft, but basically, typically what the draft is going to do here with the MLR is it's for college players that have played the college the year prior. If they're in college and they want to play in the MLR, they have to enter the draft. They can't opt to be free agents. They can be juniors who have 1 year of college eligibility left. They can enter the draft. If they enter the draft, they get drafted by a team. They may not sign a contract with that team. That being said, they're allowed to actually participate in team activities during these windows, and those windows are built around the structure of collegiate rugby. So that would be from December, I think, 15th to January 15th, and then from June, I think it's June 15th as well, to August 15th. So they couldn't be under contract, but they could certainly be involved with sevens during the summer, because sevens is very popular during the summer months here. They can be involved in sevens programs. They can be involved in some of a lot of the teams in December begin to have their training camps. They can be involved in a training camp and at least learn from some of the big fellas, but they can't take the pitch. They can't sign a contract. If they do, it voids their final year of college eligibility. If a player goes through the draft process and they don't like who they're drafted by, they can complete their college year of eligibility. They would have to sit a year after that, and then they could be a free agent. If a player enters a draft as a senior, if they don't sign with a team, again, they would have to sit a year. They would play with a men's D1 men's club, and then they would come back the following year as a free agent. So that's the process. And basically, the worst, the two franchises coming in, Dallas and LA, will get the first picks, and then it'll go to the top team, which is going to be San Diego, and then they'll go back through the process starting with the teams. So that's going to happen in June. Players have to be registered. I think it's by May. I forgot whether it's May 15th or May 17th.
17th, yeah.
They have to have their registration done by. So that's kind of how the draft works. My own thoughts, quite frankly, there might be a handful of players that have the ability to play and step on the field in the starting 23 with the team that drafts them. But I think there's ample evidence based upon some of the players that are currently playing with MLR teams that there will be those special players that will be able to do that. I mentioned Nick Feeks, Chance Wangalewski. There's a number of players that have come from Arc State, LU, Life, Cal, some of the top 10 teams. I think there are a few players that could do that and make that transition. I think the bulk of the players that will step up, it's a great opportunity for them to actually go to a team and be put into an academy program. right? There are teams that have that academy program. So they get an academy program, get into a professional environment. A lot of the teams, and NOLA does a really good job with this, find work for players. They find work for them. They get in the professional environment. They learn how to be a professional. They learn from some of these players that are coming from overseas, or these players that are really excelled on the existing MLR rosters. And then they can work themselves into that 35-man roster, and then into the 23-man side on a regular basis. But certainly, Matt Harmon is a good example. He's a life product, and he last year was kind of right on the bubble. He was in the 23-man roster, was usually a sub. Well, through the first 6 games, Matt Harmon was a starter at prop, and he did a really nice job. I think they had a really strong scrummage and won a lot of ball, and they really demonstrated against some of the tougher sides that they played that NOLA had a very stable scrum, and so Matt did a great job. And there are other players like him that stepped in. Deanne McSell came from LU. Trying to think. J.P. Aguirre stepped on for Rooney, played really well. And so there are those players that have that ability to do that.
I think the thing with the draft for me is that it's American, and it's something that the American people will be able to resonate really well with. In the UK, it probably wouldn't work because we have the academy system, and I can see both sides of the argument. I can see an academy works well because you have that longevity then of players come in at under 8s maybe, or however old, and then they work through the age grades, they play their age grade, they play their USA age grade, they go to the under 20 World Championships or something like that, and then they make their debut for their side, and then they get up to the national team. And I think that's what USA Rugby should be aiming for, is to have this progression of seeing they're with us from 8 years old, they stay in MLR for their career because the league is good enough for them, and then they can go and play for the national team. And I think that's probably the dream for USA Rugby and for Major League Rugby, that maybe one day we will see an Eagles side with the 15 who are all currently playing in Major League Rugby. I think that would be incredible to see. I think we're pretty far from that maybe, but I think that could certainly be something for the league to aim for.
We're not all that far away from it, actually. Like Nick Civetta is a starting lock. He plays in, I think he plays in Italy. But Cam Dolan plays for the Gold. You got Hanko Gurmashes plays for Rooney. On the flip side, you have Malin Al-Jabori, who plays on the other flank. Was an LU product. He plays for the United States, and he's actually, I should know where Malin played. Did he play for San Diego? There's the front row, like I said, Chance, Paul Mullen. All those guys are playing in the league. Probably our best fly half in the USA setup is playing overseas. That's AJ McGinty. But Ben Sema, who's filled in there, Ryan Mattias, all those guys play in the league. So it's actually, if you go down through the World Cup roster, I think you'd be pleasantly surprised to see how many of those players are actually playing in the league. And something makes me think that Blaine Scully, who just retired, was playing in the Premiership. He had a baby, and I think he wanted to come back stateside. I wouldn't be a bit surprised to see Blaine come out of retirement and actually play for an MLS side this season. It would be awesome, because he's a special guy in USA Rugby.
Yeah, he's a massive guy in the whole history of American rugby. I was wondering, what do you think about with the league? Do you think that the league will be able to retain some young? So let's say 5 years down the line, we've got some academies in place, we got some really good youngsters coming through. Do you think the league will be able to retain those players? Say, okay, stay in the USA, stay with your side. This league is growing, it's exciting. You've got the American people on your side. Or do you think big money moves to New Zealand or to France or to the Premiership in England will be too much for them? Do you think the league will be able to deal with those kind of things?
I think so. It's hard to say right now what kind of commercial. There's certainly a lot of commercial potential and investment potential. I mean, F45 has ownership stake in the Gilgronis and down in Austin, and they also are the principal owner in the LA Coast team. So when you've got massive amounts of money that are being injected, and if the league continues to grow and take off, there's a potential for big, broadcasting rights as well as advertising rights. The potential is very strong for there to be enough money to make it a fruitful endeavor for a player to stay inside the United States rather than to go play abroad. And I think, no offense to the Premiership and no offense to New Zealand, no offense to South Africa, but, we have a very different, in rugby worldwide, we have a very different element than they do in football or soccer, where you have $120 million US being paid to players in the EPL. There isn't that big the gap between what the U.S. players are making and players are making in South Africa, like or New Zealand Mitre 10 or South Africa and Currie Cup players. They're actually, guys are coming over because they can make more money potentially playing in the U.S. So I think it's definitely viable, and the commercial opportunities are definitely there. I was impressed by the fact that I don't know if you know this, when for the preseason games, when Mako, the Mako team, the U23s came and played, they actually had 12,000 viewers from New Zealand just watched that game with Seattle.
Oh, wow.
Right, and Air New Zealand actually advertised on the sidelines with at the game. So there's potential there for players to make money. So I see it as a trajectory where an American-born player could stay and play here and be quite and make it a lucrative endeavor.
And that would be fantastic for USA Rugby, because then obviously the fans can then get involved with their team. I want to move on to the national side now and talk a bit about how things have been going over the past few years. I think the first time I did a video with you was 2 years ago, maybe nearly now. And we spoke about the national side and about how things were on the up, that you'd had the All Black Maoris over to play. Being totally honest, the World Cup wasn't great.
It was awful.
How would you summarise the World Cup? Because we obviously saw that tackle on Farrell. There was so much promise going into the World Cup. That's how I felt about USA Rugby. So much promise and a lot of hype. I've done a lot of videos on my channel about how watch out for the USA. They could cause some shocks. If Argentina aren't on their day, they could be in a shock, and they can beat Tonga. Tell me, World Cup, what happened?
I think for me, the World Cup was on the field was a failure. I'm going to be honest, and it's no disrespect to the players or Gary Gold. They played their hearts out without a question. Ultimately, I think it's a part of the growing pains. The U.S. has a history of just falling short of expectations even. This year, I would have expected them. I mean, I would have said, hey, look, to meet my expectations for the World Cup, they need to go 1-4. Yeah, they need to go, 1-3.
Yeah.
They need to go 1-3. I thought to exceed expectations, to maybe pick off France, no disrespect to France. When they're on, they are fabulous to watch. They've been that way forever. They're exciting brand of rugby, but we've seen them also absolutely implode during a World Cup, where they just absolutely underperform. So, I thought maybe they could catch a France, possibly, and they just underperformed. Part of it is the growing pains. Like for the first time, they actually had a month where they got together in camp. It was a month or 6 weeks of a pre-World Cup camp. They were training at high altitude. I thought that was a step in the right direction. But quite frankly, Gary Gold's been hamstrung a little bit in the fact that he came into the coaching situation a little late in the game. We've had a series of coaches from John Mitchell on up that it's kind of been a carousel of coaches. I think what we need is a commitment for 4 years. I mean, look at the rest of the tier 1 teams. What does the union do? They contract with a coach for a 4-year cycle. Their eye is on that World Cup prize. And, certainly they're not willing to, it's not that they're unwilling to change coaching in the middle of that cycle. But, you look at the successful programs from from England to and I think Wales, and certainly with Graham Henry and New Zealand, South Africa. Rassie came in a little bit late, but they made a commitment 4 years. You have 4 years to develop and get us ready for this goal. And we haven't had that. I think Gary Gold may be that guy. We'll see, but that certainly should change things. I hope to see an improvement in that regard in the next World Cup in 2023.
We've seen it with Wales. We had Gatland in place. He ended after this World Cup, and now Pivac has come in, wanting to play a very different style of rugby, wants to throw the ball about, letting players express themselves. And this Six Nations first, if we're being totally honest, has not been amazing. But I've had a lot of people tweeting me, sending me messages saying, what do you think? Like, should Pivac be out? The answer is no. The guy's got a different philosophy. He's got a plan for 4 years. And for any coach to, if a team's been playing a certain way for 8 years, which under Gatland we've had such a successful time, but suddenly you're going from playing super defensive, everything is based on defence, you take your chances and then you defend that, to go into, right, here's the ball, do what you want with it. It's very different for players. Some players will not have played under any other type of rugby before in their lives, really. And I think with the USA, they need that commitment to say, okay, we may go through some rough patches, we may lose against Canada, let's hope not. Let's stick with this guy, let's give him the opportunity, let's give him the backing, he knows best, and let's bring these young players through. Because 4 years is quite a long time. We've got a young guy called Alan Wainwright. He's going to be one of the best in his position in the world in the next few years. His intelligence, his rugby intelligence is incredible. He's only been playing rugby for 3 years. You may remember him from the France-Wales game where he got an elbow to the head in the quarterfinals. But he's going to be very special, but he needs that commitment of 4 years. Say, okay, we're going to give you 4 years to become the best in your position, and we're going to trust you with that.
Yeah, I have to apologize. I did say I said Graham Henry, but he was he came before Warren Gatland. My apologies, but I absolutely. I think it's real important. And I think that the other thing that's important is for a coach to be able to have 4 years to watch players mature and develop into the system they want to see played too. You can't just throw. Every rugby player doesn't excel at every style, whether it be defensive or more, a kicking or attacking style, a wide style or whatever, a 1-3-3-1 or whatever have you. So you need to put the pieces in place. You need to let them be able to play in that system so they can develop their decision-making under the philosophies that the coach has laid out. That's one of the interesting things about Toronto, just touching base onto the MLR real quick, is Toronto was a very different model than the rest of the MLR, and that if you look at Toronto's roster, I think they only have 7 non-Canadian players on their roster. And so, and many of those players, Dan Moore, their captain, they're actually on the Canadian roster. So I would have really liked to have seen how they would have performed in the USA Canada game, which is slated for August, but I don't think that's going to happen. I would have been interested to see how they play, because I think they would have a much more cohesive system, given that a number of those players are playing together under the MLR, and the Arrows. But it's so on field, they had a nice run of 18 victories, the Eagles did, and beating Scotland, of course, feather in the cap, realizing that, of course, Scotland wasn't at full strength, but anytime you pick off a top tier nation, you got to take that as a win. Off the field, excuse my language, a shit show. USA Rugby's in dire straits, and whether they can use the COVID layoff to actually begin to think about how they want to retool, taking this time to reset, and figure out how to go forward the best way. Or whether they drown because players aren't paying membership dues right now. There's no rugby being played. We don't, we largely pay dues because it insures us, indemnifies us for injury, and nobody's paying membership dues right now. So they don't have their income, which is $5 million, largely comes from their ownership. Their revenue comes from dues. They're missing out on that. So it'll be interesting to see where they go. And MLR is fortunate not to be tied to USA Rugby at all.
Yeah, definitely. I'm quite interested to talk about tier two nations because, if we're being honest, USA at the moment is a tier two nation. And obviously, we just had the World Rugby vote between Bill Beaumont and Agustin Pichot. Pichot, very much about going for the tier two nations and giving them more opportunities. I just want to get your thoughts on the outcome of the vote with Bill Beaumont winning, and then also about what does World Rugby need to do to ensure that USA regularly can play against tier one nations, because I can't remember the last time Wales played against the USA. It's got to be over 10 years ago, surely. And, you know, I think it'd be fantastic if we could get more tier one nations coming over to the USA to play.
Yeah, mixed feelings. I want to be honest. Pichot, Beaumont, supposedly Augustine would have brought some new ideas, a little fresher approach. You know, I'm more worried at this level. I'm more worried about who's steering the ship at USA Rugby, because that's a more immediate, not only on development of youth rugby, but on, you know, men's level teams and the access to rugby. Right now, in the U.S., you have to pay $30, like between $25 and $30 a month to actually watch USA Eagle games, which, you know, it's one thing if we're talking about Wales, England. Then people pay the pay-per-view. They've earned that ability because they're in that tier one status. But I'm not paying Flow Rugby $30 a month so I can watch the USA Eagles. They've got to make it more viable to attract fans. But that being said, you know, we'll see. I hope Beaumont really starts to think about the growth of tier two nations. We'll see. As long as there's a relegation process in this model that they're developing for a world tournament, you know, then I can live with that. USA's got to earn the right to be in the top 12. I mean, Japan's done it. So, you know, we've got to take that step, and we just have to work hard towards that goal. But you know, we'll see. You know, we'll see. Right now, World Rugby's in the process of bailing out the USAR. So, you know, at least in the immediacy, that's good for us. It'll help, and they want, quite frankly, it's in their interest to do so. They don't want to see USAR fold. You know, then something will step in that who knows what will step in its absence. I mean, it's a vacuum. It'll be filled, but with what? You know, it's the entity you don't know. Which would you rather deal with? The entity you know, or the entity you don't know and you don't know what's coming? So,
and like as you were saying about that, about the World League. You know, it was mentioned a couple of months back about having the top 12 teams, and USA fall just out of that. And I think it's a really interesting idea. I'm personally against it, actually, just because maybe a bit of a traditionalist, but I think there needs to be a way for tier two nations to regularly play against other sides. And I think one way of doing that much easier is to have a calendar, a rugby calendar that's the same the world round. So that, you know, you got the Northern Hemisphere, they play from March, the Southern Hemisphere play from March until December, and then obviously the Northern Hemisphere plays from about September until May. And so it just juggles everything up. So if everyone was the same round, there's internationals at this point, and then there's club rugby at this point, and that would make a lot of difference for the USA, I think. And in Europe, especially, the big debate really at the minute is Six Nations relegation, which I think would be fantastic for us. I think that would make the competition a lot more competitive and give opportunities for countries like Georgia. Georgia won the second tier of European rugby, that championship, for probably about the last 10 years, very comfortably. Romania, probably not the team they used to be. Russia are getting better. And that would give them the platform then to say, okay, if we win this, we can really push ourselves, because, you know, Georgia, Italy play against each other a few times, get close results. Georgia's show in the World Cup. You know, they're a decent side. They're not just a scrummaging side. They are a decent side. And if the USA can have something similar where they can regularly get that game time against better teams, you think of countries like Fiji as well. It's crazy to think that New Zealand has never played against Fiji in Fiji. It's just crazy to think that, you know, like you'd think that would happen. It's crazy.
Well, what's interesting about that is, and this is why, as much as I would like to see U.S. consistently play one of the tier one nations, whether, you know, and you consider Japan, since they'd be inside that 12, knocking on that door, if not it on the inside of that tier 1 status, maybe. They certainly performed well in the World Cup. But here's one of the USAR's big problems. We lost. I think they're saying right now we're $8 to $10 million in debt. And anywhere from 1.5 to $2 million of that debt is owed to Wales and South Africa for the game that was in which we were paying them to come to the United States play at RFK Stadium. I don't know that we paid $1 million to have New Zealand coming over in 2014 here in Chicago. That paid off because it was New Zealand, and we hadn't played New Zealand in the United States. I can't even tell you the last time that happened. And so they filled, the Soldier Field. I think there were 62,000 people. They did well on that. But unless they fill a stadium like that, it's going to be a losing venture. We lost money when only about 19,000 showed up to watch Australia and the United States play, and certainly we bid it hard when the Italy and Ireland played. We did well when Ireland and New Zealand played. So unless there's a league, which I'm not so sure I agree with the World League. I think one of the things that makes the World Cup a great affair is the fact that it happens every 4 years. Yeah. There's something unique, that specialness to it. That's what makes it fun. South Africa has bragging rights for 4 years, and as well they should. But unless they get support from World Rugby to bring over a Tier 1 nation to make it economically viable, I just don't know it. I don't know that it's in USA Rugby's best interest to pay teams like Wales or England or whomever to come over. I think it's got to be something that's supported by World Rugby. Otherwise, the United States will really take an economic loss. And even if New Zealand came over every year, at some point it would lose its uniqueness, right? And you wouldn't have. I mean, when I went to the game, there were loads of people from New Zealand coming over. They were coming over to watch that, and then they were going over to the UK to watch New Zealand play England. So there were loads of New Zealanders. I think they're going to say probably 10 or 15,000 maybe that came over to watch something like that. I don't have the exact numbers, but there were a number of touring groups that came over. So they've got to find a way to make those engagements financially successful. Otherwise, the United States will be in a worse shape than it is economically right now. That is USAR.
Yeah, and USA Rugby, I think, needs to find a way of bringing rugby into culture in the USA. That's part of the culture. Like in Wales, especially in South Wales, rugby is part of the culture, but that takes time to build. It does take time. It takes maybe 100 years to build. Like in the UK as well, in England, you go to the football, like Saturday is all about the football or soccer. You go to the pub before the game, you get your pint, you talk to the same people, you walk to the stadium, you sit in the same place, you talk to the same people, you go back to the pub after the match, you have your pie, you go home, you watch the highlights when you get home. That is your Saturday. It's been that way for 50 to 100 years. It's exactly the same every single time. And it's about building that culture, which, as I said before, is going to take time. But I think that's what MLR can bring, is that culture.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. I think part of the problem in the United States as it sits right now is that, like when I coached high school, we played on Thursday or Friday night. Your college programs play on Saturdays. Your men's programs, your men's clubs play at either noon and 1, and then your second side will play at 2 or 3. And then your MLR teams are playing usually on Saturdays as well. So, part of the problem, they've got to find a way to bring those entities together, right? Because if I'm playing men's club and I'm playing at noon, and one of the MLR games is at 11, I'm not watching it. I'm getting ready for my match. Or if it's a 3 o'clock game, the only way I'm going to be able to watch it is the 3 o'clock game is if I go into the clubhouse. Well, in America, most men's clubs don't have clubhouses. The one I played for, we were fortunate. We have $1 million clubhouse. We can do that, but most teams don't. Or for that matter, if you are on a men's side that plays in a city like in Austin, plays in a city if they have a 3:00 game, are you going to be able to play your game and then get over to the game in time to watch the professional side play? I think they're going to have to move to a model where they make it more inclusive, where you have a big men's club match at the stadium as a curtain raiser. Perhaps you have some of the youth programs play so that you get those kids in the door. Now they're there, and then they stick around and watch the men's team play, and then they stick around and watch the MLR team play later in the evening, and now it's a all-encompassing affair. Or play on Sundays when none of the other teams are playing for the most part, and people who are rugby fans can go to see the MLR team play.
Yeah, I think it's about making that culture, isn't it? As you say, that then, so on the Saturday you play your club rugby, your children play their youth rugby, and on a Sunday you maybe go as a family to watch your local MLR side, and that's how it's got to work. I think, in the UK, with soccer, for instance, what we get is teams will tend to play, children will tend to play in the mornings, so usually on a Sunday morning, and then you've got your football in the afternoon, your soccer in the afternoon to watch. I heard someone say on your MLR rant about the importance of getting rugby into the curriculum. And I think that's really important in your local schools and colleges, because here in the UK, there's a lot of minority sports, which are certainly growing. And what we used to get was people who'd come in and teach that sports themselves. But I think the way to get rugby on the curriculum is the education board needs to see what good does rugby bring to our education, to our students? Why should we include it? Do you think that bringing it onto the curriculum, getting children involved, would really benefit rugby in the US?
Oh, without a doubt. The difficulty is wrestling away the American football mentality. Because, it's been my experience, and both my kids played American football. It's been my experience that most football coaches see rugby in the United States as a competitor to American football. Even though they're played in different seasons, American football in the fall and rugby in the spring for us, at least at the high school level, they see it as a competitor. But the key is getting it into the curriculum. The challenge is there's not enough PE teachers that are familiar enough with rugby to feel comfortable teaching it. So somehow you have to find a way to not only educate them, but to continue to educate and develop them, even if it's touch rugby, even if it's on the basics. It's one of the things that I really feel is that USA Rugby in this reset could really take advantage of taking a moment and thinking about how they want to see rugby develop at the age grade level. So where do you begin to introduce, the tackling, the contact area? Where do you want to introduce rucking? Where do you want to, at what point, what age do you want to introduce scrummaging? At what age do you want to introduce competitive scrummaging? And have a consistent curriculum for when those get introduced at the age grade, so that when you do have PE programs that are looking to implement touch rugby or flag rugby, then you can begin just to develop a smaller skill set that you ask kids to be able to perform and ask teachers to teach. They don't have to worry about rucking. They don't have to worry about scrummaging. They don't have to worry about some of those other aspects of the sports that do confuse Americans, and just focus on basic passing skills and basic offsides and basic principles of the game. And then as kids get into the programs, youth programs, then you can begin to introduce some of those more technical aspects of the game and evolve those on up through, high school and college levels. So I think it's really, for me, it's really about developing, how can we develop a curriculum that we can put into age grade? How can we make that curriculum easy for teachers who aren't familiar with the game to understand? How can we prepare and continue to support them with knowledgeable people in the process? And then how can we, make sure that there's a consistent philosophy? Because quite frankly, a lot of American parents are worried about concussions, right? So if we can take some of that, analyze some of those fears, take some of that and introduce it at appropriate places that use medical science to back up, our rationale a bit, it can be really helpful and go a long way towards attracting more players into the game at younger levels. And then we don't have to, my philosophy is we introduce a kid to youth rugby, even if it's touch or even if it's at the basic level. Then when we ask them to play rugby before high school, introduce them to rugby before high school and into high school, it's something that they're familiar with. And then, when football coaches, and they do threaten, if you play rugby, you're not going to play football for me. Well, then the kids, I found that kids that are good athletes who love rugby and who have picked up the rugby ball when they were younger, at 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, they say to those coaches, okay, then I guess I'm not playing football because I love playing rugby and that's what I'm going to do. One of my best athletes I ever had did that. And the coach ultimately, the football coach was forced saying, well, I don't want to lose my best athlete. So I guess I'm going to let him play rugby. And if more kids do that, I think you get more kids playing.
Yeah, and it's about, as you said, with getting the kids comfortable with the basics, and then hopefully that grips them enough for them then to go to their local side, or when they get into college, that they again can learn the more in-depth tactics, the more in-depth techniques. Because at the end of the day, rugby, in some ways, is a very simple game. The aim of the game is to get the ball over the white line, put it down, you score a try. The way to do that, you pass the ball to the open space and you exploit that. That is the basics. And that's what Americans need to grasp, is that the game isn't as complicated as if they can get the basics, and then when they get involved, when they go to watch their local MLR side, that they may ask yourself, say, okay, why has that penalty happened? You can explain that. I mean, when you're watching a game, sometimes there's nothing more annoying as, when I'm watching my dad's like, why is the ref blown there? I'm like, because this has happened. He's like, but why has that happened? I'm like, no. But I think as fans, we do need to be more willing just to explain things and just be like, okay, this player came in on the side of the ruck. They're not allowed to do that. They have to go over the top of it, and they have to compete for the ball without touching the ground. And
so it's interesting you say that, because actually in Colorado, they actually had handed out stickers to people who were very familiar with the game. And the stickers basically said, if you have a question about the game, ask me. I'm willing to teach you. And so somebody who was new to the game had never seen it, they knew who to look for. Hey, why'd this happen? They look for somebody with a button or look for somebody with the sticker, and hey, why did this happen? And that person would explain it. I think, that's one of the other things, simple things that we can do to develop and grow the game is welcome people who are new. And typically, it's my experience in American rugby culture, we are very welcoming. It's a very welcoming culture worldwide, but in the U.S., I mean, when you find out somebody's played rugby in the U.S., you immediately have a friend.
Yeah.
I've never personally shaken hands with Adrian or Benji or Doug Arena down there in NOLA, but I'm pretty sure if I called them and said, hey, next year I'm coming to a game, they'd say, hey, do you need a place to stay? That's just the nature of American rugby. We have so being very fan friendly, I think, can help develop and grow the game.
Definitely, and that's something that's really going to get people involved, is really going to keep people involved, because if they feel they're part of something, part of a culture, part of a family, part of a movement even, then that makes a massive difference. And that is maybe something that is lacking in some areas of rugby in the world, but in MLR, I guess, again, because of its infancy, you start in the right way, which is really, really key for the league. I just want to quickly glance over the USA national side again and talk about the World Cup in 2027, because the rumours about USA wanting to host that, I know Argentina have pulled out of the running for it. I think that this could be the big turning point for rugby in the USA, because with MLR, if it's grown for the past 7 years, for those 7 years, you get to World Cup, you get to the pinnacle. If the USA national team can do well, we saw how crazy it was in Japan, how good the fans were over there. And maybe you could say rugby in Japan is a little bit more down the road, maybe 10 years ahead of the USA maybe. But a World Cup could make a massive difference. Would you want a World Cup in the USA?
So, I have a bucket list like most people for life, and one of my bucket lists is to attend a Rugby World Cup final. So obviously, anytime there's a big game in Chicago, it's a non-question with my wife. It's like, I'm going to the game. Like, you can come or not come, but I'm going to the game. So there's no question that a Rugby World Cup in the United States is something I would long for. Is 2027 the right year? I don't know whether that or 2031. I think they need to throw their hat in the ring at some point just to get the pot boiling, so to speak. I just don't know that that's the time. Logistically, I think it's the logistics are one of the biggest issues. As we know, the World Cup is traditionally played in the fall, at least for Northern Hemisphere teams in our fall. So we're talking about anywhere from end of September to beginning of November, right? what are we up against? Well, we're up against the biggest American sport, American football, right? And the problem is that and this is the biggest, again, obstacle. Can it be worked through? I think it can. It's going to take a lot of moving parts to work. But here's the big problem. What size stadiums do you need, even during pool stages, to have a successful World Cup? You need probably a minimum of 20,000 seats. You probably are looking for more closer, even for your tier 2 nations when they stand off, for probably 20 to 30,000. And for your top tier teams, you need 45 to 60,000, right? So what stadiums in the U.S. are able to hold that are grass, by the way, right? I mean, rugby at a World Cup level, I don't think the World Rugby is going to want any final played on a turf, and they're probably not going to want, I would say, any games at this juncture to be played on turf as we know it. So it needs to be natural grass. Well, most football stadiums that can accommodate 60,000 to 100,000 are artificial turf. The reason Chicago was selected as a location for New Zealand, USA, for USA, Australia, for New Zealand, Ireland, which is a great match. I mean, I was there. It was arguably one of the in modern times one of the best matches that we've seen. It was fabulous. But Soldier Field is a natural grass field, and if you look at the touch, the end zone lines, they were short. Is World Rugby willing to accept that? Yeah. So and then even if you can find the pitches that work, are there football teams that play in those pitches? Are you going to conflict with Chicago Bears, and can you get Soldier Field to be consistently used for 5 pool games? Five pool games over the course of what, 2 weeks?
Yeah.
3 weeks? You're not going to get. I don't think so. So there's some issues. Now in Chicago itself, we have SeatGeek Stadium, which holds 20,000. The Chicago Fire had played there, but they grew too big for that stadium. That's why they're not playing the season they were supposed to play at Soldier Field. So I think there's some. I mean, for me, there's some logistic issues. And by the way, we're not like like Brazil with the World Cup of Soccer. Where we're building stadiums exclusively for the World Cup. That's not happening in the United States. You need existing structures, and I just don't. Logistically, I don't know that they check all the boxes. That's the biggest entity that stands in our way.
Because if USA are going to build all these new stadiums, you want to think, okay, there's a plan for this. There's a plan that these stadiums are going to be used. As you said, in Brazil, those stadiums just sitting there empty, doing nothing, and the cost. Okay, yes, it's incredible for the game. You get the advertising, you get the broadcasting, you get everything like that. But that is only for a month, compared to 20 years down the line. We've got an empty stadium here, which is rotting away and is not being used. Yeah,
and you're spot on. You're absolutely spot on. And by the way, a lot of those were financed by the government. I mean, even like, where's the next Soccer World Cup is coming up? Isn't it in
2022?
Is it in the air?
Qatar.
Yeah, that's financed by the government, right? The government is not financing new stadiums. As a matter of fact, what's finances new stadiums are individual owners and local governments, and they don't have that kind of cash to do that. Certainly not for rugby. And we saw in the case of St. Louis with the St. Louis Rams. The St. Louis wasn't going to be held hostage to building a football stadium, and they would have gotten 60,000 every weekend. So that's why the Rams moved to LA, because they were willing to publicly finance it. So I just don't know that it's viable. I mean, even right now, as we see SeatGeek Stadium, which holds 20,000, they're really looking for. I think they're hurting now that the MLS team is pulled out of there. So it's got to be financially viable all year round, and it's not going to happen unless something logistically can be worked out with the NFL, or we might have to change the window of when it happens. The advantage is we can take advantage of the varying climate. We can play during the off season, January, February. In Florida and Houston, and they have a dedicated stadium down there in Viva. I think it seats 5,000, but it's far short right now of what you would need. But Houston, LA, Arizona, all that in the southern part of the United States, New Orleans, Atlanta. They certainly could play there, and there are some domes. But again, do you have natural grass? I mean, even Arizona. Even Arizona is a covered pitch. Now they have natural grass that they move in, but it is they can close the roof. But Atlanta's totally enclosed. It's an artificial turf. So, they'd have to change the window of when it's played. Of course, soccer is willing to do it now that, so maybe World Rugby would be willing to do it if it financially makes sense for it to happen in the United States.
Yeah, and like with soccer in Qatar, that's a bit dodgy, but we won't get into that too much. But I think with the World Cups have been hosted recently, so you think about the one in 2015 in England and Wales, the stadium's already there, the culture's already there. There's longevity with the stadiums, so that a lot of the stadiums that were used were soccer stadiums, but a lot already were rugby stadiums. Most of them were rugby stadiums. The one in France, you got all the top 14 teams, which will be, all them stadiums will be ready to go. All of them hold probably plus 20,000 at least. You think about the one in New Zealand, again, the home of rugby, and it's about, maybe it is that little bit too early for the USA, is that you need to build that rugby up, and maybe it's 20, 30 years down the line where rugby is much bigger, where we have the facilities, we have the fan base, we have the excitement, and you have the fans calling out for it. And I don't feel as if there's that much of a calling out from USA fans, to be honest, for the World Cup at the minute. Because, when New Zealand hosted the World Cup in 2011, I remember a lot of Kiwis were really wanting a World Cup. It'd been a long time since they'd had a World Cup, and it was the right time for New Zealand. But I don't feel as if US fans are really screaming out for a World Cup at the minute. But you have had successful tournaments. You've had the Sevens in Las Vegas, which has been extremely successful. I think that's a brilliant way of introducing people to rugby, because it's that carnival party atmosphere. People enjoy it. It's easy on the I-7s because the tries galore, is very open, and it's more about the match day experience. If MLR can drag that in, which I think they have to an extent, with getting the family atmosphere in, I think MLR is really on the right way to going. With the current season, what has happened with the season? Has the season been cancelled for MLR, or have they just postponed it?
No, it's absolutely positively canceled. What's interesting is I think George Killebrew, who's the new commissioner, came from the Dallas Mavericks setup, and MLS. So he does have a lot of experience. I think he's whether people like the draft or not, I think it was kind of a stroke of genius, because if done the right way, I think the draft can be effective for the pitch and players on the pitch. But it's kept us fans that are engaged in the MLR talking about it. Yeah. Sometimes even negative publicity is good publicity, because you're still relevant in a time when you would have been playing matches and are not, but people are still talking about it. One of the things that I think the MLR has done, and hopefully it's not to its detriment, they're actually paying their players. I know some leagues there are some pay cuts, to some players, both on the soccer side as well as on the rugby side, but they're paying their players. All of them are paid. Now they don't make nearly as much, so it's not as financial hard. It's not as much money, but I think the hardship is still there when you don't have. No team is making money. If somebody was getting into it, an owner was getting into it to make it, an investment, in the short term, they picked the wrong investment. Might it be a 10 or 15 year investment? Yeah. But then somebody that's willing to invest 10 or 15 years better damn well be a rugby fan, because it's a long-term investment. So to have to pay the players, I think was a tremendous step, for the league and for the individual franchises, because I know it hurt the owners to do that financially, but I think it was an incredible gesture of goodwill. And I think there are a lot of players that stuck around in spite of, some went back to their respective countries, but some have stuck around, and they stuck around in part because, wow, this team cares about me, the league cares about me, and they're committed to this, and they want to see 2021 happen when COVID is under control. So I think the league can survive to get into 2021. I know it can. If this thing lingers longer, a lot of sports are going to take a hit, not just rugby, but baseball, football, etc.
Yeah, and the virus is going to affect a lot of people. My local soccer team has recently gone into liquidation, so they're no more, unfortunately. But a new Phoenix club is going to come through in the next few weeks, hopefully. How do you think the league can keep fans engaged? I know you're doing your fantastic show on the MLR rounds, which I really enjoy, and I'll link that in the description down below, because anyone who may not be aware of MLR rugby, who may not be up to date with everything that's going on, it's a super chilled show. First of all, there's lots of different segments, fantastic guests. I'll be on there shortly at some point in the next few weeks, so that's going to be fantastic to be on. Hopefully you'll all be able to understand my accent. Hopefully that won't be too much of a problem.
Ty has a South African accent, so if anybody can figure that one out, they're probably going to be able to figure out the Welsh accent.
And yeah, that show keeps people engaged. That's the main thing. Good viewership numbers and people getting involved in it. And what you're doing so well, I think, as well, is you're getting fans involved, giving their opinions, which is really, really key, and doing that well. But what do you think the league itself needs to do to keep fans engaged? Because who knows when rugby will be back? That's the reality. And the MLR starts in February, is it? January, February time?
February.
That's a long time, because in the UK, we may have a season starting in September, but you may have to wait 6 months, 7 months for any rugby to be back. How do you think the league will keep the fans engaged?
It's tough. I think they took some steps, at least initially here, they're slowly releasing. I mean, in America, the model, I don't know how, I'm not nearly as familiar with how the sports world works in the UK or elsewhere. But in the United States, what leagues have started to do, they're smart in that they look at their league not on a game calendar. They look at it on a 365-day-a-year calendar. So what they try to do is sprinkle in things that even in the off season make the league relevant. So American football, the NFL does a tremendous job at this, it's free agents can happen. And so talk radio is filled with who are the big free agent signings, and Tom Brady got signed by the Buccaneers. And then all of a sudden now, a couple weeks later, you're into the draft. Oh, okay, who's getting drafted? Who's going to be the number one pick? Okay, that happened. Okay, now we have, the next step in the process, which, we're not far away from OTAs if they're allowed to the off-season training, not far away from that. So they find a way to stay relevant. I think Killebrew is trying to do that with the draft, with some of the other announcements that have come out. Even Colorado, at least for us, it's something we talked about on the show. We remain relevant in the fan zone as well as on the rant. We remain relevant. So those are things that they can do to stay relevant. I think the other things that individual franchises can do, I for one would like to see something, if they allowed sports to happen in the fall, even if you can't have fans, if they figure out a way to make it a commercial enterprise, to have something in the fall, whether it's an all-star game, whether it's another team comes from overseas, a U23 team like Mako did, or something like that, and they have some one-offs. I don't know where international rugby will be at the time, but something of that nature. Perhaps start the exhibition season a little bit earlier. Typically, that starts in January. So we'll see. And I definitely think individual franchises need to go out and reach out into their community. San Diego does a tremendous job of this. They go to parades, they go to events. Anything happening in San Diego where there's a big, where there are crowds. The Legion have a representation there. There are players there. There are coaches there. There's people that bring in new rugby fans. So I think individual franchises can do that. The challenge is going to be, moving forward. I think there's a big dearth in the United States, right there in the middle where I'm at. Okay, the closest club to me, the closest franchise is Toronto. That's 8 hours away. Colorado is no longer in the league. And so you're out on the coasts right now and down in the Sunshine Belt down there. So, the respective clubs have to continue to do what they do, to attract new fans and to keep fans loyal. I think one of the cool things that a couple teams did, the Free Jacks did it with their scarves. If you were like they had a special for Seattle, they did it season ticket holders. Season ticket holders had their names printed on their home and away jerseys.
Oh, wow.
So that was the big to-do is, hey, I'm a season ticket holder. I got my jersey today. Here's my name. And they'd post it on Facebook. The scarves at Free Jacks had their initial not owners, but their initial season ticket holders. They had them put on the scarves. So little things like that can go a long way to the fan base. Finding ways to keep them engaged and keep them in touch with the team, reaching out to the team, to keep fans interested. But it's going to be, no doubt, a tough couple of months. I mean, that's one of the things we talked about on our show. Once the draft hits, there's going to be a lull. What do we talk about? What do we do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's where you guys are ahead of the game with the social media, because I think social media can be so powerful to get people involved, to get people chatting about MLR and keep them interested. Because, as we said, we don't know how long this is going to be. It could be quite a while for sure, and we want people to keep getting involved in the league because the league is growing. It's a really, really exciting league. I genuinely believe that, and the fact that it's captured my imagination of what the league can do, being a Brit, halfway across the world, watching MLR, watching it regularly. When I wake up, there's an MLR game on, and what I've loved from the league is that quite often they've put games live on Facebook for free to watch. Yeah. That is a fantastic way to get people involved in the game, to be watching the game, because who knows, someone might be maybe put Toronto into Google and then it's live on Facebook and they watch and they're like, oh, this is interesting, this is rugby, I've never seen it before. And people get involved that way. And I think that's something that the UK can learn from, because I think America is so good at advertising things. They're the king of advertising things. And if MLR can get that into their way of advertising, because I do think the UK misses that, especially rugby in the UK. I just don't think it's advertised as well as it could be, because in the US, you're, as I said, king of advertisers. So if MLR can keep doing what they're doing, so free games on Facebook, what you guys are doing is massive, keeping the community chatting about MLR and getting involved in it. And what I'd love to see, as you said before, you could ring your friends down at Nola Gold and say, look, I'm coming down. They'll be like, yeah, come stay. And I've seen that all over Facebook, in every Major League Rugby group on Facebook or Twitter. Everyone is like that. Everyone is welcoming. Everyone is like, we're in this together. This is exciting. And I think that's how the league is going to grow.
Yeah, it's ESPN Plus, I think, has been a critical partner. And one of the big reasons why is I probably, when the season was going, I was watching 4 to 5 matches a weekend. Not only preparing for my own show, but just out of interest and trying to show support for the league, so that ESPN could see it as a viable partner in the sports broadcasting business. So the fact that that I can go on ESPN Plus right now and watch any match that I missed from the season, that's why I think this idea of the streaming service is so critical to the development, especially of emerging sports. $5 a month. I'll gladly pay $5 a month, US, to watch as many rugby games as I can fit in over the course of the month. Gladly, right? So I don't have a problem with that. I think they're a good partner for the league moving forward. I hope they continue with it. And the Facebook has been very good too, in its own right, because that's free. And again, I picked up some matches that I can't watch on ESPN Plus through Facebook.
And I think that's, in the UK, I think in general, I think that's how sport is going to go eventually. I think it will be a streaming service. I think, we are moving away from TV really now. It might be on an app or something like that, where you click on an app, you maybe pay, I don't know, as you say, maybe $5 a month or something like that. You get to watch all MLR matches, and maybe you pay maybe $2 more, $2 more, for some additional behind the scenes stuff or whatever like that. And maybe you pay for a package, maybe you want MLR, maybe you want the USA Eagles, and maybe you want the Six Nations in there. You pay $15 a month or something like that. I think that could be a really good way of getting people involved. But in the UK, what we seem to have is where when the Six Nations is on, it's on free to air TV. it's on the BBC over here, or it's on ITV. So if someone on a Saturday afternoon is sitting around at about 3 o'clock and they put BBC on, then they're going to come across a Six Nations game. And I think that's really important for the USA, that rugby is easy to find.
Yeah.
Rugby isn't easy to find. And again, it's got massive competitors in American football, basketball, baseball. It's got massive competitors in them sport. Do you think rugby is easy to find, or do you think the league still has a challenge of finding a way to make it easily accessible for everyone and people just to stumble across it as such?
It's hard to find. I mean, even to watch. Okay, so the Eagles, I have to go to Flow Rugby. I don't know anybody in the rugby community that likes Flow Rugby because it is expensive. I don't think that their camera angles and their production quality is all that good. And so, that's supposed to be the top level of rugby in the United States, and yet it's A, hard to find, and B, it's expensive, and C, it's not that well produced. ESPN Plus, I really like it. I do find it difficult to find matches there. I mean, I know what I'm looking for, but there have been times, in spite of the fact that I know what I'm looking for, I've still had difficulty finding the matches I'm looking for. And heck, even the season, the first match of the season, I wanted to watch my guys at NOLA. Like, I almost would have sprouted a pair of wings and flown down there to watch them. And I'm literally, talking with people over Facebook in New Orleans going, hey, has anybody seen this on ESPN? I haven't seen anything come up yet. And it was literally, I think, 24 hours before the match that it actually showed up on ESPN on the app as available. So, I was sweating bullets. That stuff, I think, where the MLR needs to do a better job at negotiating with ESPN. Now, I understand that ESPN's going, okay, on the list of, all the sporting ventures that were involved in, rugby is not, doesn't have the weight to negotiate, but why not? I mean, why shouldn't that be on the priorities? Is figure out a way to, so that A, it's easy to find, and B, we know when our games are being played. We know when you're going to which ones you're going to televise. You guys need to get the calendar out, the schedule out a month ahead of time, so people know where they're going to find their team. So.
And it needs to be advertised to people as well, as you said, with enough time. So things like, okay, let's meet at the local pub or the local rugby bar. Let's watch this game together. There's loads of Irish bars all over the US where you can get together and watch them rugby matches. And I think that's so important that people create good memories and associate that with rugby, because that's what's going to keep people involved in the game. Because here in the UK, I know rugby is so much bigger, but when the Six Nations is coming up, the two main broadcasters will advertise the shit out of it, basically. And you will know, everyone knows the Six Nations is about to start. The newspapers covering it, radio stations are covering it, YouTube channels are covering it. And I think that's what your show's done so well, and the MLR Rant, is you have publicised it really, really well, and people are getting engaged, which is fantastic to see. And for it to be in its infancy and where it is at the minute is really, really exciting. I'm really excited to see where MLR can go, and I think that the league is at a point where it's got the balance right with culture but competitiveness, because it's important to keep that competitiveness.
Yeah.
You don't want to just turn it to a game and be like, I don't care who wins, I'm just here for fun. You want to see your team win. It's competitive, and that's maybe been the criticism of people in the UK about the MLS, especially. Is it truly competitive? Whatever. But I do think it's got a competitive edge. But I think MLR has to start with that competitive edge. Like, we hate this team. Obviously, you don't hate them, but you don't like them. They're your rivals. You want to beat them.
The NOLA fans down there, they have a saying, nobody likes Atlanta. That's what NOLA stands for. Nobody likes Atlanta. Yeah. So there's definitely got to be the competitive edge. And quite frankly, one of the things I think they can really do to demonstrate to the rest of the world, viewers like yourselves, there's a fan of ours, Ruan, who's down in South Africa, amongst others who live in other parts of the world. They become fans. But one of the ways we can do is bring over teams like Mako, like some other, even if it's emerging youth, like under 23 side, bring them over and have them play MLR teams just for marketing purposes, but also to demonstrate the quality. I think New Zealanders were a little surprised by Houston and Seattle at how tough a games they played against the Mako team when they came over.
Yeah, that's an interesting question I want to ask. Where would you say the quality of the league is at the minute? Do you think it's at a good enough level really to support the USA national side? Or do you think there's still some developments we need to see? Is the league at a level where it's attractive to watch, first of all? Am I going to put a game on and think, okay, yeah, I can watch this. This looks like a normal professional rugby game. It looks good. There's people in the crowd. The TV coverage of it is decent. Is it at a good enough level to attract people, do you think?
Absolutely. I watched, was it the Legion? I apologize. It was the Legion and wasn't Toronto. I'm trying to think what match it was with the Legion in Seattle. One of the matches, and it was an absolute Donnybrook. It was as tough of rugby contest as I've seen, and I remember watching, what was it, the World Cup in '95, or was it France and South Africa played in that downpour? It was an absolute bloody contest. As a matter of fact, I remember noting on Hammer Rugby as I was covering that game that the San Diego was playing defensive rugby in their own half for the last 25 minutes of the match.
Wow.
and no scores were produced. And I believe it was, I think it was San Diego, Seattle. But anyway, no scores were produced. It was an absolutely great game. Even Austin, who hadn't won a game yet, they were playing Houston for the Texas Cup. Right? It's kind of it's kind of like it's not quite like the Ranfurly Shield, because that's played more on a league basis, but it was just this cup that's played. It's a game played between these two teams, right? With Dallas coming in, there's going to be a third team potential. Two teams that, quite frankly, between them had maybe 2 wins or 3 wins. It was a fantastic game. So I think the standard's there. And certainly with the influx of foreign players who had played since they were little, it helps. So it's there. It's a great brand of rugby. It's gotten better every season as I've watched. That's why I was so looking forward to see what happened this season, because I really thought San Diego really played well. And quite frankly, again, you go to a Colorado who won, I think, 1 or 2 matches at that point. They ended up beating Toronto, who was undefeated. So there's some parity in the league too, which is important, I think, for a successful league.
Yeah, it's really important that anyone can beat anyone, and that's why I think the EPL in England is the best league in the world, because the bottom side can beat the top side. It is possible for that to happen, and that's important to keep fans engaged. And as you said about the Texas Cup, for those teams who maybe aren't at the top, who aren't going to be winning the league, it's important that fans feel, okay, we've got something to fight for, we've got something to celebrate, get to the local community involved, come to your local side play. It's a cup. If we win, it's going to be a great atmosphere. It's going to be a family event. Come along. I just want to finish by talking about the MLR rant. I think it's a fantastic show, as I said before. For anyone who hasn't seen it, just plug away. Okay.
It's kind of funny because it actually began on a whim. Myself and Scott Farrar, one of the other guys, so Ty Paraga. Ty Paraga has he's a South African. He's located in Iowa. He has the MLR fan zone. They had about 4,000 members on the Facebook page, and we got to talking about. I think it was an article that came out about Bassero, and he was going back to France. And the big question was, did he live up to expectations? And Scott, as a Rooney fan, was like, yeah, absolutely. And I said, oh, no, he didn't. And one of the questions I said is, okay, let's take your 4 big signings in the offseason: Ranger, Digby Ione, who didn't end up getting in because of visa issues, Bassero, Nonu, and the Beast. Out of the 4 guys that made it here and played games, rank them from 1 to 4, which one you would take, right? And I'm like, Bassero is the last for me, right? Yeah. So for me, I didn't think he really met expectations. Scott took a different approach and said, look, he moved to number 8. He moved to number 8 because they had some injuries, and he was kind of forced into it. And he scored a couple tries, and he played really well. And he really thought I sold him short. And so Ty said, wouldn't this make a great show? And we kind of chuckled about it. And then about a week or two later, I said, hey, Ty, as a teacher, I'm having to use these online meetings with students. Is there a way we can record this and have our show? And so Scott came along and said, yeah, I have a program. I pay for service anyway, because he runs the Rooney supporters, Rooster Booster, and he does shows. So he's like, yeah, I got this. So that's how it evolved. It literally came together in about a week and a half, and we each bring a little something to the table. Ty is brilliant as a commentator. He actually was doing the Colorado, not the broadcasting, but the actual PA announcing.
Okay.
Yeah. So he had that experience. We got Dallin Stanford on, who's for America. He's one of the best commentators for rugby in America. He came on for the first episode he was on. I think that gave us a little bit of professional presence, and that along with Ty. And then, it kind of went from there. And so we each bring something to the table. I've kind of begun really reaching out and getting our guests lined up, and I'm doing some editing. Ty's doing some editing. Scott's really good at he's doing the recordings and getting all the tape together for the final edit to come out. And so it's really been a lot of fun. Those guys are great. And one of the things I think is the primary focus for us is fan involvement. Bringing somebody like yourself on, bringing other members who contribute a lot to the MLR fan zone, and then sprinkling in this week's episode. It came out already, but on Friday, the exclusive piece with one of the top, Patrick Madden, one of the top college prospects that were coming out. And by the way, I'll save it, but I point blank asked him if he was coming out for the draft, and he answered the question. Doing things that really make it accessible, asking fans for input about questions, topics should be covered for the week. That's how we want to stay engaged with what is important to the people that love the MLR. And I think that's key to our success.
I think the four of you who are regularly on the show work so well together. I think you guys have that connection, you have that chemistry. It's basically mates who love rugby. That's what it is. Yeah. And I think it works so well. And for anyone who hasn't watched it, again, link in the description. Do go check it out. It's fantastic. I quite often will put it on the side as I'm making dinner or as I'm washing. And sometimes I have to stop what I'm doing and then really listen to what you guys are saying, and to think about why you've been talking for so long. You get your yellow card and things like that, which is a fantastic way to get people involved.
It's funny because, that's the other thing we're trying to do is when you do YouTube segments, and know from experience, and I know from Hammer Rugby, about 10 minutes, that's about all you're going to get people for, right? Yeah. But then there are other people like yourselves who go, I want more. And as I'm doing something else, multitasking, I have this playing in the background. So we're gonna be doing some podcasting soon, where we just release the episode in its entirety in the audio version, so that people can listen to it, whether it be either in their car or wherever have you. And then we had actually talked a little, just in the initial stage, we were talking about doing potentially a live show. If the USA Canada piece comes off in Rugby Town in Colorado. Ty is actually going to be there anyway. He's going to be on the PA if the game does kick off. And Scott and I were talking about, wouldn't it be cool if we could make it in? And Dallin's going to be there. Again, we could actually do a live show. So we're looking at that piece too, doing some live stuff like every once in a while, to where people could call in or type in questions. And again, it's all about fan engagement. It's all about having fun. It's all about spreading the love for MLR and rugby itself.
Yeah, definitely. So as I said before, links in the description. Do go check them out. I think that's everything. Thank you, Rob, so much for coming on, mate. It's been great to catch up and also just chat rugby, which is fantastic. So thank you very much.
Hey, I appreciate it. I love the show, and I love what you do for rugby. And I can't wait to have you to return the favor and have you back on and talk a little bit about your perspective as a UK resident, as a Wales resident, and a rugby fan. Your thoughts on the MLR and your perspective.
Awesome. Thank you very much.